What if I told you that Ferrari was sabotaging, without knowing it, Lewis Hamilton's season since the first round of the year? And what Fred Vasseur almost explodes when discovering the truth? Today I reveal what they really hid in SF25, and why this could be the beginning of the end. The announcement was interpreted as the culmination of an epic narrative. Hamilton, in search of his 8th championship, would end his career at the top, driving for the Scuderia he dreamed of since childhood. In Maranello, the atmosphere was filled with optimism. Internally, the feeling that the ingredients had finally gathered to return to the top had finally gathered. There was talk of a new DNA for the team, a renewed leadership under Frédéric Vasseur, and a silent revolution in the development of the SF25 car. But that illusion evaporated quickly. From the first laps in the preseason tests in Bahrain, the data began to reveal inconsistencies. The car was unpredictable in fast curves, unstable in braking, and with erratic behavior in changes of direction. It was thought that it was a matter of adjustments, to learn to interpret the machine. However, Hamilton, with all his experience, began to notice something deeper. Unlike his years in Mercedes, where any problem was followed by agile solutions and concrete improvements, in Ferrari everything felt slow, bureaucratic, and above all, silenced. The first great alarm sounded in Australia. During free training, the car was unstable on the rear train, and in the race the rhythm simply disappeared. Hamilton could barely scratch a point, but the most serious thing was what was not seen. Engineers already had indications that something was not right with the internal architecture of the car. Even so, the team avoided lifting public alarms. He opted to wait for more data, more races. That silence turned out to be the crucial error. In the second calendar event in China, the SF25 began to show extreme behaviors. Telemetry sensors revealed that to generate effective aerodynamic load, the car should roll dangerously low, practically hitting the asphalt background. This caused premature wear of the lower plate, leading to Hamilton disqualification in the sprint classification. This incident was not isolated, but the visible symptom of a much more serious structural defect. A lethal combination of a poorly designed rear suspension and an inefficient height management system. For Ferrari's technical team, it was the equivalent of discovering a crack in the foundations of a skyscraper. The worst was not the failure itself, but the fact that it had gone unnoticed throughout the winter. The SF25 had been conceived with a base weakness, and that meant that no configuration adjustment, no matter how sophisticated, could compensate. Internally, we started talking about the car as a defective model. Several engineers began to share that the car was out of their operational window almost all the time. It could only be competitive if it was forced to extreme conditions, which made any long-term strategy unfeasible. This reality, as raw as undeniable, marked the principle of a year that promised glory, and was becoming a technical trap that no one seemed to have escape. The tension between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari's technical environment did not explode overnight. It was a progressive accumulation of small ignored signals, evasive responses, and an increasingly palpable frustration. What began as a relationship based on the mutual illusion of building something historical, ended at a crossroads of uncomfortable silences and an obvious emotional and operational disconnection. During the first races, Hamilton tried to stay diplomatic. His public statements were measures, avoiding pointing guilty, but their body language, their cryptic comments, and especially radio communications began to show the reality that was lived inside Maranello. The symbolic moment of this break occurred during the Monaco Grand Prix. A historically special career for Hamilton, where he has had memorable performances. This time, however, the car was ungovernable. In the middle of a batch, with the car out of pace and without answers from the wall, Hamilton launched a question that resonated as a silent complaint. "Are you angry with me or something? You are not answering the question." Beyond the literal content, what transmitted was devastating. It was the climax of an emotional disconnection. The most experienced pilot of the grill, with 7 titles behind him, was feeling ignored. And when a pilot like Hamilton begins to distrust his technical environment, the problem goes far beyond bad setting. What followed was a progressive deterioration of internal dynamics. In the Spanish Grand Prix, Hamilton no longer contained. After a race in which the SF25 could barely complete turns with decent rhythm, Hamilton was categorical to the media. "This was the worst career of my life." It was not an emotional exaggeration, but a precise radiography of the level of frustration he experienced. In private, he revealed that he had felt that the car was not driving in any section of the weekend. Ferrari, meanwhile, confirmed that something did not square. In subsequent analyses, a constant loss of aerodynamic load was identified on the rear axle, especially serious in the Barcelona circuit, where aerodynamic efficiency is everything. The situation resulted in internal clashes. Not at the level of shouts or public ruptures, but with strong technical tensions. Telemetric data confirmed that the aerodynamic load in Hamilton's car was significantly lower than that of his partner Charles Leclerc, despite assembling similar configurations. It even stated that there was a specific defect in the chassis assigned to Hamilton, although the initial structural analyses did not confirm any clear anomaly. What was clear was that something was systematically failing in the correlation between simulation and track. What was promised from the factory was never fulfilled when the car rolled in real conditions. Vasseur, observing the growing media pressure and the obvious internal wear, was forced to intervene directly. Urgent meetings, complete reviews of the feedback protocols between pilots and engineers were held, and a restructuring of the technical team in charge of the Hamilton car began to be studied. But the damages were already made. The trust between the pilot and the team had been eroded for weeks of poorly diagnosed problems, misguided technical decisions, and above all, due to a lack of frontal honesty in communication. Hamilton, accustomed to an environment like Mercedes, where feedback was immediate and acted with decision, was trapped in a structure where decisions passed by multiple filters and where the external image was often prioritized over the internal solution. This emotional breakup, more than any technical failure, was the real blow to Hamilton's morals. Because in Formula One, trust between pilot and engineer is not a luxury. It is an operational need. And when that trust breaks, everything else begins to crumble. The truth that finally emerged within Ferrari was not a simple technical anomaly, but the reflection of a deeper structural problem that affects the operational culture of the team. For weeks, Maranello's surroundings lived with inconsistent data, complaints of the most experienced pilot of the grille, and clear signs that the SF25 was not fulfilling the slightest expectations. And yet, nobody operated the emergency brake. The awakening of this awkward truth began when Fred Vasseur decided to intervene personally, tired of vague responses and justifications that did not square with reality on the track. The trigger was a series of cross-analysis made after the Grand Prix of Spain. Ferrari, in a desperate attempt to understand what failed, compared all telemetry readings between Leclerc and Hamilton cars, simulator data, wind tunnel, and track performance. What they discovered was devastating. The correlation between simulator and track was erratic in Hamilton's car, but the most serious thing was to find unjustified differences in the behavior of the rear suspensions and the longitudinal stability of the chassis. Someone, at some point in the design and validation process, had minimized technical warnings that were revealed criticism. Fred Vasseur demanded clear explanations to his technical team. What he received was an implicit recognition of negligence. It was not an individual failure, but a chain of bad decisions that were hidden under a layer of misunderstood technical optimism. Several engineers admitted that the initial reports on the anomalous stiffness of the rear suspension and the lack of adaptability of the height control system were considered irrelevant in the final development phase. This was done to avoid delays in the car production calendar, which suggests a worrying logic, prioritizing the fulfillment of deadlines on the integrity of technical design. The most serious thing was not the ruling, but its management. Upon discovering, it was revealed that there was a kind of internal culture where to report significant problems was seen as a threat to the pace of work, rather than a critical alert. This culture of technical silence created an atmosphere where errors accumulated without solution, until they finally exploded on the track. Hamilton, knowing the detail of these findings, did not hide their disappointment. In internal meetings, he was direct and critical, noting that he had never lived such a situation, even in the worst moments of Mercedes. His comment resonated strongly: "You can't win if you don't hear who takes the car to the limit every Sunday." From this point, Ferrari's technical team entered into a state of full review. Vasseur authorized internal audits to evaluate the development protocols of the SF25, as well as the communication practices between departments. There is even talk of possible exits within the technical area if it is confirmed that certain responsible people deliberately hid key warnings. But the damage is already done. Hamilton's project with Ferrari, which should be a perfect synergy between experience and prestige, began to fracture from its base itself: mutual trust and technical coherence. The SF25, more than a car, has become a symbol of what can go wrong when ambition is not accompanied by rigor. The uncomfortable truth that Ferrari faces today is not only a design failure, but the mirror of a structure that has not yet learned to live with the pressure of being large. Meanwhile, Hamilton continues to fulfill his role, extracting every thousandth that the car allows him, but knowing that the most difficult challenge is not on the track, but in the way Ferrari decides to face his own ghosts. And that possibly is the toughest battle of his entire career. It is a warning, a reflection of what happens when the brightness of the institutional image opaques the urgent need for self-criticism and transformation. Because behind Hamilton's disappointment there is not only an engineering problem, there is an organizational dysfunction that goes beyond SF25. What has happened this year is the manifestation of a repetitive pattern within Maranello. A culture of late decisions, strategic silences, and of a hierarchical structure that still fears confronting its errors with the brutal honesty that demands the current Formula One. Now the question is clear and urgent. Is Ferrari ready to truly change? Or will it limit themselves to replace names, promise improvements, and repeat the usual cycle? The 2025 season has ceased to be a race for titles for Ferrari. Now it is a career to recover credibility, for rebuilding from the ashes of an uncomfortable truth that can no longer be hidden.